interview today. We're going to be going over some of the biggest news stories in the world. And to do that, I have Dr. Drew Pinsky with me. Dr. Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
It is truly a pleasure to be here.
So you've got this great show going, getting some of the best guests on and covering very similar topics that I cover.
Yeah, let me just tell you the story behind that, because it was kind of interesting. Is that as I was busily getting canceled for daring to say "calm down, everybody," and by the way, all the propaganda that was designed to crush me had me saying "calm down." Don't you know we had a pandemic 10 years ago, H1N1 killed 300,000 people. You did not know that happened. And now you're shutting down the world for a dangerous thing, but can't we calm down about this? And every time I went out, I would say the same thing. And listen to the CDC, listen to Dr. Fauci. I've worked with these guys for years. They will get us through this. That was the only thing I got wrong. That was actually what I got wrong. And of course, they cut that off of every statement. So now I look like I knew only what I was talking about. I got wrong. We should not have been. The CDC got adulterated during this. I've never seen them behave like this. It was the most astonishing thing. But as a result, my wife and I started doing these little streaming shows out of our kids' playroom. And I felt like the French underground. I swear to God, I was just sort of trying to give people information that they couldn't get elsewhere. I was just trying to call like I saw it, just try to calm everybody down and talk about the facts and what's real and what's not. And ended up sort of realizing a lot of other people had some things to say that had been silenced also that I could learn something from. So I started interviewing Jay Bhattacharya and Peter McCullough and all these people. I was like, oh my goodness, I learned something from every one of them and continue to learn from them. So that's how we backed into this space, was through being the French underground, just trying to get people information, or a reliable source of information.
Yeah, mine was kind of a similar thing. I was doing financial planning before this. And then when they shut down my business, all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, I've got this YouTube channel I've been trying to get up and running, and YouTube was canceling people left and right. So I had to use sarcasm and comedy in order to get past the AI and the algorithm and things like that. But I wanted to, you mentioned Dr. Fauci and the CDC.
Yeah.
One thing that I like about RFK Jr. is he has been educating Americans on the fact that the government is compromised in many ways. He calls it corporate capture, military industrial complex, big pharma. Would you agree that in some ways big pharma has infiltrated and captured mainstream media and the government?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. In fact, I heard from one marketer from a drug company. Now, again, I can't source this, so I can't guarantee it's true, but it made sense to me, because I was looking at some of these obscure medication that they've been advertising on CNN and whatnot, and I'm thinking, how many sales could they? How much does this cost that it's worth it to them to spend millions and millions of dollars? And this one marketer said, oh, no, we don't expect to necessarily make that many sales, that it is worth the return on investment, but we get control of CNN as a result. We get control of the media, and then the government, and then the messaging. And I first became aware of this from RFK Jr. The first time I interviewed him, I did not realize how much our free speech was under assault. And I did not realize about the cozy relationship between regulators and corporate, particularly my business, medicine and pharmacology. And he enlightened me to that, and I was persuaded that he was really onto something, and it made sense to me. And then we started talking about how the publications, in fact, the big three, in fact, of the medical publications that I've relied on my whole life to help educate me and make decisions, that these had been adulterated by the same capture. And at the end of my first interview with him, he went, you know, Drew, you're so brave to talk to me. And I thought, brave for a physician to talk to an attorney with an opinion? That requires bravery? Where am I? I am through the freaking looking glass. I thought I lived in America where any two people could have a conversation. I used to do when I was on CNN, remember I was on CNN HLN for almost 10 years. When I was on HLN, I would routinely on HLN, we'd interview Nazis and white supremacists, and we just try to figure out what is going on with these people. But now, oh no, you talk to one of those people, you're platforming them. You're platforming them. How could you platform a person like that? It's like, what in the hell what has happened to this country? And so it's made me a freedom of speech absolutist and a fighter for that. In fact, I'm reading Jonathan Turley's book right now on freedom of speech, and it's a fairly nuanced historical landscape, legal historical landscape that I was not really fully aware of.
Yeah, no, I had him on recently, and we were discussing that very topic. Do you feel like Anthony Fauci and others in the CDC, do you feel like they were routing hordes of people and money only through Pfizer? It felt like the only way out of this pandemic was the perception that big pharma would save us versus old medications that they knew were having an effect versus beefing up your own immune system. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's no doubt that's what they were doing. That's just what they were doing. I mean, and I understand why they would do that and why they would think that's the right thing, but the way they did it was the wrong thing. Look, the Fauci, his organization, the CDC, is an advisory organization. They advise physicians. They advise public health officials. They are not, thus saith the Lord. They are not designed to create recommendations for anything behavioral, physician behavior, patient behavior, public health doctrine. It's just ridiculous that they went right there. And the playbook, it was an interesting playbook. It was grown out of the playbook against HIV and AIDS, which was quite effective. I was deep in the AIDS pandemic. It's where my affection for Dr. Fauci developed. He was a great leader through that. He really helped us. And he was advisory. And he kept telling us two things. He said, you young physicians who are deep in this, because it was mostly the residents and the younger physicians who were dealing with HIV and AIDS at the time, you need to go out on the media and talk about this. It's why I went on the radio. It's one of my motivating factors and why I was doing radio in the early 80s. I was way into AIDS treatment. And he kept saying, there's going to be 2 million dead, 2 million dead. So we have to scare people into certain behaviors. And at the time in my head, I went, yeah, these are very powerful behaviors we're trying to shape. Sexuality and in the 80s, it was all unrestrained too. It was, hey man, whatever you're into. And and you remember the slogans at the time became, if you have sex with one person, you're having sex with every person that person ever had sex with. You should be scared. If that person has sex with 10 people, you're having sex with 10 people. It's like we used fear and then we congratulated ourselves when it worked. And it did work. However, we also developed a discipline in changing health behaviors, particularly for young people, which is what we were concerned with. It took us about 10 years, but an entire discipline developed. And it essentially was the Loveline model, the thing I was doing on radio, which was you get a relatable case of somebody making some not so good choices. Somebody like me comes in and explains what's going on and what the right thing to do is, and then the consequences ensue. Use some humor and some music. Boom, that's it. That's how you don't change young people's behavior by me standing in a box with a white coat preaching or chanting fearful slogans. It doesn't work to young people. It works for older folks, interestingly. And so that was the playbook they were using with COVID. The other playbook they were using was the playbook that brought us the opioid crisis. People don't understand where the opioid crisis came from. It came from evangelizing physicians. Much like Dr. Birx went around the country and evangelized about lockdowns, we had an entire discipline in medicine called pain management that evangelized the virtues of opioid pain medication. And the secondary thing that the CDC and Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci did, that the opioid enthusiasts did, get control of the regulators. In the case of the opioid pandemic, pain became the fifth vital sign. And if you didn't put pain as the fifth vital sign on all your admission sheets, the state medical society, the insurers, your hospital administration, the Department of Mental Health, the Veterans Administration, the federal government would all crash down on you because pain was as important. And if you didn't hand somebody a giant bottle of Vicodin when they left the hospital, you were guilty of patient abuse. And several physicians were fined millions of dollars, not malpractice, criminal abuse, and or put in jail. Well, that's how they did their thing. And then the drug companies, of course, loved it, blew wind in the sails of it, and off it went. Same thing with COVID. It's evangelizing physician, it's regulators getting control of things and crushing any dissent through the regulatory system. Now, of course, now we have X and Twitter and Facebook and all these other things we didn't have back then, but it's the same damn playbook, and it's disgusting. It is disgusting. It is an example of what happens if you centralize authority. We should fear and run from centralized authority. And certainly when it comes to medicine, there's nothing more efficient and effective than the patient-doctor unit.
Yeah. Dr. Robert Malone was one of the first people that helped me understand that this was like mass infiltration of our mind, just the media pounding us over and over again. Employers pounding us over and over again. I didn't personally get vaccinated. As I did my own research, I was young. I thought, okay, I'm not gonna get involved in this. Subsequently, I ended up with Delta COVID back to back. It made me extremely sick.
Nasty.
Gratefully, I had run into you, Dr. Zelenko, Dr. Peter McCullough, and the information that you guys were putting out, I genuinely believe saved my life.
Yeah. It was a nasty illness. It was something worthy of our deepest concerns. Is it worthy of us relinquishing all of our civil liberties? No. It should be up to doctors taking care of patients in the setting of a serious pandemic, period. And we get on as usual. And people are smart. They adjust their behavior accordingly when there's a real risk out there. And to the extent that you can control it, we do. Naturally, we do that. But yeah, I am a moderate on everything, frankly. I was talking to a psychologist this morning who was accusing me of how being a radical centrist, a radical moderate. And I'm a moderate on a vaccine too. My patients are all vaccinated. They're boosted. I believe it helped them. They're all elderly, and I had one patient die. I've only had one serious vaccine reaction. Although I've seen lots of vaccine reactions in young males, and I would not recommend it for an adolescent or young adult male under any circumstances. Clearly, the risk reward isn't there. I'm embarrassed, and I have to apologize to the patients that I did recommend the vaccine to, that I couldn't really give them full informed consent, and that was the sort of the order of the day, that we didn't know enough to be able to give informed consent. We should have been more clear about that we are going at this blindly, and we're still somewhat doing so because the proper studies were never done. But it's looking better than not, though we are still seeing lots of problems. And to the extent that we're in the day of Omicron and the illness itself is extremely mild, I see no benefit to continue to vaccinate people, even if the risk is remote, because the risk of the illness is essentially zero. Is nobody dying of COVID today? Of course people are still dying of COVID, because elderly people die of every infection you can possibly imagine by the tens of thousands every day throughout the country, whether it's a urine infection or a viral pneumonia or a COVID or some combination or a hip fracture. That's what happens when we get older. These viral pneumonia used to be called the old man's friend because it was eventually what killed the very elderly. Now, we are in a time in this country we don't believe we're mortal and don't believe anybody should ever die of anything. If you remember, one of the slogans during COVID was "one death is too many." Yes. Well, now, first of all, if one death is too many, we're not in a pandemic, because pandemics are defined by excess death. So, if one death is too many, and what is a risk reward analysis where it's forbidden for anybody to die of a deadly illness? How do we get there? So therefore, we're willing to take any risk to prevent one death. That is foolish, because we will cause deaths that way.
Yeah. 1,200 doctors have signed a petition to immediately stop mRNA vaccines. Why is mRNA this new coveted medical technology, even though the data shows that there is danger in not fully understanding it yet?
Yeah, it is. It needs better study, and this is our case point. Get all the vaccines you want, but you should have access to proper placebo-controlled studies. And that's all he's saying. That's all he's saying, and I would agree with that. If you have a deadly cancer and they want to use an mRNA platform to try to attack it, like melanoma, I am all for it. I'm all for it. If you have a moderately serious cancer and you want to take the risk of a lipid nanoparticle getting deposited in your ovaries, your uterus, your testes, or that perhaps the mRNA or some DNA fragment contamination might do something to you that puts you at something risk of something further down the line, and you're just scared of your current cancer, even though it's moderate risk, and you want to use an mRNA technology and you understand the risk, by all means, I hope we have those things available for you. But if we're going to be using mRNA widely for, say, a flu vaccine, well, now I've got questions. I got questions. How do I understand the risk reward in that? How do I understand it? Since we've never studied it really fully. It seems to be safe there, but it also seems to have some fraught with difficulty. And the fact that we're not analyzing the data that comes out on VAERS is deeply concerning to me. And the fact that we never did placebo-controlled trials, randomized controlled trials with reasonable outcome criteria. We've never done those. Well, I'm concerned. Yeah. That's it. Not that that this should never be a platform. Just we should do the right work that we always do. Why all of a sudden does this have any political energy to it whatsoever, other than let's get this medically right and done properly?
Yeah. Let me switch gears with you. Kamala Harris is suddenly the greatest thing since sliced bread, even
incredible.
Though she's been in the background for 3.5 years, essentially doing nothing. 69% of Americans this morning, according to the Harvard-Harris polling data, say they believe she will leave the U.S. border wide open, and that she is to blame for close to 10 million people from 150 nations coming in with different diseases, viruses, ideology, etc. What are your thoughts on Kamala Harris and on the border situation?
Well, somebody straightened me out the other day on this too. There's lots of interesting data on so many different topics that you miss if you're not careful. And this was a testimony by oh shoot, I'm blocking the name of the Homeland Security Director.
Alejandro Mayorkas.
Mayorkas. And he said, well, you know, corporate America needs low wage earners. Now that we've raised we have a big demand because of COVID lockdowns and because of the economic catastrophe of COVID, all of a sudden we can't fill the jobs. And corporate America is crying out for help. So this is going to help them, having 3 million people come in here. They can undercut American labor. Think about that. You're gonna undercut the market forces that allow labor to thrive by bringing in people that will do it for next to nothing. That is wild to me. It's again further evidence of how they are just undermining the working class. It is disgusting. That's one issue. The other is the propaganda machine and it at work. All of a sudden, they've taken someone who they were disdaining and making fun of 3 weeks ago and looked around and went, oh my God, the solution's been here all along. It's this genius woman who is like, she is the most wonderful, brilliant human we've ever seen. Why didn't we see it before? Remind yourselves two things. America used to have laws against propaganda. We used to have them. And we undid them in the last 20 years or so. And essentially what that allows for is media and thought manipulation that we used to allow to be directed towards other countries could now be directed domestically. So these powerful propaganda instruments, and of course, no better than the federal government and the three-letter organizations, they're the ones that are the experts in this, cut it loose on the domestic scene. So now we have this incredible propaganda machine, which was at work during COVID. You saw it. Now it's at work in First, pushing President Biden out, and now elevating Queen Kamala. And we have what, I don't know if you've interviewed Matthias Desmond, but he has a very clear sort of study of what this piece of human behavior is and how it breaks down. What he says, he calls it mass formation, and you mentioned that Robert Malone brought this up, but it's Matthias Desmond's work, and he was studying it before. He was studying the effect of propaganda on totalitarianism even before COVID, and then when COVID broke loose, he saw it writ large. And what he told me was, look, you have to understand that, first of all, narcissism is underlying all of this, and that about 20% of people are extremely prone to brainwashing. They are the ones, they are the evangelists, they are the ones that get swept in right away. They are the ones that become, the propagators of the propaganda and the full enthusiasts. About 10% throw the bullshit flag immediately and go, something's not right. This is not right. Something's wrong here. This doesn't seem right that you didn't, she was the worst thing ever 3 weeks ago, and now she's the best thing. One of these, both sound like bullshit to me. Okay. Excuse me. And 70% of people just keep their head down and want to be left alone. They just want to be free to do what they want to do and live their lives. And that 70% needs to be mobilized. We need to make them aware of what's coming at them and this whole phenomenon. And to the extent that they get swept in by the 20% that are brainwashed, that has to be stopped. We have to find a way to get in the way of that. And they just need to be aware of what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. Do you remember, like most people, exactly where you were on 9/11?
I do. I remember exactly where I was.
Where were you?
I was in bed because I was out here in the West. And it was long enough ago that I had a clock radio that would wake me up with an alarm. Okay, it was the end of the clock radio era. And I had it set to the radio station where I worked. And as it turned on, Ralph Garman, who was a sort of color guy on the Kevin and Bean morning show here locally in K-Rock, came on and said, immediately his words came out over the speaker, which was, of course, you've all heard by now that a plane has struck the World Trade Center. And my wife flew out of bed. I've never seen her move so fast, and ran downstairs to turn on the television. And I followed as much as my mushy brain would allow me, as quickly as I could, because I'd been up till 12:30, 1 in the morning, broadcasting radio. So it took me a minute to get out of there. And then we sat. I remember where I was standing when the first tower went down. I was talking to a friend of mine. I was watching, and we had an old television screen in front of our fireplace. It was before the days of the flat screens and stuff, where they were around, but they were $7,500. And my friend said to me, he goes, these things are toast. They're done. And I went, what are you talking about? We'll repair the upper floors and whatever. And he goes, no, they're done. And then I watched in amazement as the first tower went down. I couldn't believe it. I was in definitely a state of shock and disbelief.
Yeah. I was in the Dominican Republic walking around an abandoned zoo, and someone said to me in Spanish, your country is under attack. You should probably hide, right?
Did you say an abandoned zoo?
An abandoned zoo.
What does that mean? What does that look like, and why were you there?
I was doing a Christian service mission in the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, and they said, hey, they've opened this zoo. They've turned it into a public park. There were no animals, but I was walking around early in the morning. So anyway, completely shocked. And then I had this same shock yesterday as I read that President Biden has approved 3 of these terrorists avoiding the death penalty if they would agree to admit guilt for killing 3,000 people. What are your thoughts on him approving? This seems so crazy to me.
It seems crazy to me. I looked at it and I just thought, and this is absolutely where I stay, there's much more here than we know. I need more information. This makes no sense. What's going on? What is the thinking, and who's doing this and why? So I just, all I know is that there's something that I don't understand. So I'm reserving judgment for the moment.
Yeah. I guess I should too as well. It just really caught me off guard. You have, as an internist, you typically deal with older patients. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump's idea of eliminating Social Security tax? I looked into it, and, it didn't even get passed as something that was taxed until Joe Biden gave the final vote on it in the 90s. But should people that have a tax forced out of them for retirement, then when they get into their older years, have to pay tax on that? I mean, until someone brought it up, it's like, yeah, why are we paying tax on this?
Social Security generally to me is a mess. I don't like that my kids are going to pay for my Social Security. That's the state. If you look into Social Security right now, you as a financial person should probably know this already, but it's not what I'm going to make back is not going to be from what I contributed. Even though I did contribute quite a bit, it's actually going to be from the pockets of my kids, and I don't like that. Something's got to be done about that. And then to have it taxed on top of that, I mean, God. I mean, what is going on here? There's so much. What it makes me feel is this constant thought bubble over my head. Will you please leave me alone? Will you just leave me alone? Just get your hands out of my pockets and leave me alone. And so, yeah, that's my basic take on them taxing things that they've collected from me.
Yeah,
but I live in California where I'm so used to it. And not only am I used to it, I'm used to getting nothing for it. This is the part. I have a home in New York too, where I spend a bit of time, and just an apartment. But I pay lots of taxes there too. But you know what? It feels totally different to pay for taxes in a city and a state where you get something for. You see it. You walk outside and you see the parks and the transportation and the infrastructure and the clean water. You see it. California, $98 billion for a fast railway between nowhere and nowhere, where not one track has yet been laid down.
Yeah.
Really? And I'm supposed to feel good about that?
And they're God. Like, homelessness is exploding. We're the best at homelessness. Now, we don't know where $20 billion went.
Yeah.
But
well, now, mind you, what's going on? Now Newsom stands up and goes, what's going on here? We got to take care of this. He's been in charge for how many years? And it's like, yeah, okay, I'll take it in any form, Mr. Governor. But for God's sakes, what took you so long?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, final question. I appreciate you coming on. Last night, we had 2 American citizens return from Russia. I've covered those stories. I was grateful to see this former Marine and also a reporter at the Wall Street Journal return. But then after that, President Biden is walking around. He's confused. He doesn't really say much. And then he walks up the stairs onto the wrong plane.
Wow.
Service does nothing. They're literally standing there going, like, we don't want to rush on and pull him off, but we also don't know who's on the plane. And the American president go onto the wrong plane, and then they turn off the cameras and they had to remove him from the plane. How is he mentally able to continue to run the country if he isn't mentally able to run for president?
Well, not only mentally able to run for president, let's remind ourselves, we are assessing him with a yardstick that is appropriate for whether or not we should take the car keys away from Grandpa, because Grandpa is going to kill somebody or himself if we let him drive his car, because he's so neurologic, whether it's full cognitive impairment or just that his motor reaction time is off, whatever it is, he has deteriorated, Grandpa has, to the point that we need to take his car keys away. He shouldn't be practicing medicine anymore. He shouldn't be, whatever his profession. He ought to be sort of. We have a system in medicine called the wellness system that physicians get referred to the system if they appear to be in any way impaired because of aging or substance or psychiatric or whatever. And then we do an assessment. And if they are not up for the task, then we ask them to, we report it, and they are asked to step down. And that's that. In this case, this is something not just should we take the car keys away. There should be a higher standard for somebody who is the leader of the free world. There should be not just, are you able to move about and dress yourself? Are you up to this task of leading the free world, which is a much bigger deal than just the yardstick we seem to be using for President Biden? And it's sad, but it is true. Now, unfortunately, we have no systems like that in place other than is it the 25th Amendment? Yeah. And I read somewhere that only took one cabinet member and the vice president, but somebody else corrected me and said that it's a majority of the cabinet and the vice president. What are those people doing? What are they doing? How can they? Well, how do they justify allowing this to go on? Probably it is the case that he has not been running things for quite some time. And that bothers me almost more than anything. And that makes me fearful of what would happen if Kamala gets in there, who I'm not sure who she is or what she believes. And if they start dictating what she's going to do too, because I'm not super happy with these people. So it's not the government as it was intended to be run. It's something that I've become aware of because of COVID. Paul Alexander alerted me to this. He was at the HHS back in the darker days of COVID, and was the first to alert me that the 6-foot distancing was an absolute made-up fantasy that had no basis in any fact whatsoever. And he was showing me that that our federal government is run by a group of middle management bureaucrats who take the position and believe firmly that the elected officials are just here for short periods of time and they're not the ones that really run the government. We run the government. That should be a 4-alarm fire for everybody. That is a government that is out of hand and is running contrary to the very opening line of the Constitution. And the last line of the Gettysburg Address. The government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from this earth. It seems to have done so, and we should be alarmed.
My understanding from Zero Hedge and Daily Mail is that former President Obama used the threat of the 25th Amendment to get Joe Biden to ultimately step down, which kind of sounds like a coup. Or blackmail to me, but what do I know? I'm just a guy on the internet.
Well, I look at it from a medical perspective, which is he either meets criteria for the 25th Amendment, and if he does not, and if he does, and if they feel they could use it to manipulate power and they don't use it to protect the office, that is messed up. That is completely messed up. He either is somebody that should be subject to the 25th Amendment, or he is not. But he's saying we could be if we want. If you don't let us have our way, that's disgusting. Again, disgust is something I'm feeling all the time these days about our current political system. Wake up, everybody! That's 70%. We got to get them. And the place to start is with freedom. And by the way, I think TWC is who sent me here, and that was an important part of my journey too, which is the wellness company, which is something Kelly Victory said the other day. She said to me, she goes, if we were helping get patients access to important medication and things, the way we're doing it now through TWC, 10 years ago, that would have seemed maybe problematic to us or maybe even crazy. And she goes, and now it's crazy if we don't do this because we've seen what they can do. People need to be ready. We need to empower patients. We need to give them access. I had a meeting this morning with TWC, and we are going out of our way to price this in ways. In fact, we have an EpiPen in our emergency kit, our first aid kit, that is priced better than any EpiPen in the country that I'm aware of. And we are going out of our way to make it accessible. It's backed up by telehealth. There's a manual if you want to do it yourself. And everyone has to have a telehealth first also. And this is the future. I've spent my entire career protecting the patient-physician relationship. I told you 30 minutes ago that that's your best unit. It has been adulterated. We now have to start focusing on empowering patients, and that's what TWC is all about.
Yeah, well, I love the wellness company. I appreciate them sponsoring the channel. You guys have a product, the spike support product, which helps dissolve that spike protein.
Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about that. It's funny. You and I are talking about this right now because I had a conversation with Peter McCullough this morning about this. I have a friend, a brilliant writer, producer who was completely disabled by long vax. Once he got his first booster, he was destroyed and has been sick for 3 years. So please don't tell me this doesn't happen, for God's sakes. And I put him in touch because he's tried lots of things and he's had some success with some things and he's sort of set back by some stuff that happened recently. And McCullough was saying, no, use the nattokinase and the spike support. Use it, and we now have him taking 2 pills twice a day. And he said, sometimes I'll go up to 4 pills twice a day. I'm not recommending that, but I'm saying he has great confidence in this product and helping people. The issue in long vax and long COVID is the continued production of spike. That's what it is. And the vaccine turns your body into a spike factory with no off switch in some cases. And that's when you get into trouble. And that's what Dr. McCullough is trying to help treat.
Yeah, well, that's what my own doctor said. She said, I believe spike protein has infiltrated your internal organs. I started having heart issues,
Oh boy.
and panic attacks and things like that. So to be able to have something that helps me get rid of that and feel better, I believe was just an absolute godsend. So
Oh, good.
yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on. This has been a fun conversation. You're someone that I've wanted to meet, and I'm going to put a direct link to the wellness company, also to your show. Where else can they follow you? Is Twitter a good place?
X, you can follow me on X. The main thing, my main really focus these days is this Ask Dr. Drew show, which we do Tuesday and Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Thursday has been like that noon lately. Sometimes we do it on Monday and Friday too, so keep an eye out. You can check it out at drdrew.tv. They'll give you a blast what our schedule is. But it's where we just are interviewing the most interesting people, and some of them I agree with, some I don't agree with. But you know, they just are. It's hard to get a wide spectrum of opinions out there right now, and I am so dedicated to freedom of expression that's where I'm putting my effort right now. So please join us there. The best way actually to do it is to subscribe on the Rumble channel. We appreciate you subscribing there. Ask Dr. Drew.
Okay, I will put a direct link so it's easy to find. Dr. Drew, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great